This section is parallel lines. Parallel lines never intersect. In this picture, lines N and K, here's line N, here's line K, never intersect, so they are parallel. And the notation for parallel is two straight lines, or two vertical lines between the line names. You can also name the lines based on the points on the line using capital letters. Line AC because of the points A and C, or line GI because of the points. There's some other choices as well. A transversal is a line that intersects two or more lines. So in this example, line M is a transversal. We could also call it line HB, or several other titles based on all the points that are on the line. Whenever you have two parallel lines cut by a transversal, which means that a transversal is intersecting them, so it's called parallel lines cut by a transversal, special relationships are formed between the angles on the two parallel lines, and we're going to talk about those. So the first special angle that's really neat is corresponding angles. And basically all this tells you is that since these two lines are parallel, all the angles up here that fall in the same position as all the angles down here have the same measurement. They're exactly the same. So for example, angle 1 and angle 5 are the same angle, just on different parallel lines. So they have the same measure. Angle 3 and angle 7 are going to have the same measure. You can kind of look at it and tell too. Angle 2 and angle 6 are going to have the same measure, and angle 4 and angle 8 are going to have the same measure. So you see in this picture under corresponding angles that they have an example of corresponding angles. Another way to think about it is top right, same angle. Bottom right, same angle. Top left, same angle. Bottom left, same angle. So I have listed all of those examples here for you to show you all of the congruent angles that are corresponding, or they're congruent because they're corresponding. Our next type of angles are supplementary angles. And we already know that supplementary angles are any angles that add up to 180 degrees. The ones that are going to help us out a lot with these diagrams are the ones that are adjacent to each other, because we can just tell by looking that they're supplementary. So I call them adjacent supplementary angles, but they're really just called supplementary angles. So if you look up here, you'll see some of the examples. Angles 1 and 2 are supplementary, 2 and 4, 4 and 3, and 3 and 1. Angles 5 and 6, 6 and 8, 8 and 7 and 5 are all supplementary. The way I denoted that was by showing that the sum of these pairs of angles would all add up to 180 degrees. So those are the ones I just mentioned. The next definition we already know is vertical angles. And we know that any time two lines intersect, the angles across from each other are going to be congruent. So we're going to see lots of vertical angles when we're working with this diagram of two parallel lines cut by a transversal. The transversal creates the vertical angles when it cuts through the parallel line, each of the parallel lines. So up here, angles 1 and 4 are vertical, so we know they're congruent. Angles 3 and 2 are vertical, so we know they're congruent. Angles 7 and 6 are vertical, so we know they're congruent. And angles 5 and 8 are vertical, so we know that they are congruent. So here's the notation for those four. Now, since we know all this information, if somebody was to give us one angle, we would be able to figure out the measures of all the angles in a diagram like this, which we'll be doing shortly. Now, to help us understand some other definitions, we're going to go through and look at how to think about some words. Interior angles are the angles that are in between, inside the two parallel lines. So these four angles are referred to as interior angles. Same side angles are angles that are on the side of the transversal. So these red ones are same side, and then these blue ones are same side. So again, we have interior, they're inside the parallel lines, and same side if they're on the same side of the transversal. Then we have alternate side angles, and those are on alternating sides of the transversal. So it kind of makes sense. Alternating sides and same sides. Now, alternating sides means they're crisscross, not just on the opposite side, but they're crisscross from each other. So you can see these two blue ones are examples of alternate side angles. These two red ones are examples of alternate side angles. So what we're going to do now is put together these definitions to come up with some of the relationships you need to know with parallel lines. So alternate interior angles are angles that are alternating. So they're on opposite sides of the transversal in a crisscross manner, like this. And they're interior. So they're interior in between the parallel lines. So alternate interior angles are congruent. So in this picture, let's start at picture 2. 5 and 4 are considered alternate interior angles. They're alternating around the transversal and they're interior to the parallel lines. They are congruent. 3 and 6, alternating and interior. They're congruent. Over here in picture 1, angles 7 and 2 are alternating on the transversal and interior to the parallel line, so they're congruent, and 3 and 6 are alternating and interior as well, so they're congruent. And so this is where I've listed those pairs of angles. The next definition is same side interior angles. So if you look up at the pictures, again, same side were the ones that were on the same side of the transversal. Interior, again, means between the parallel lines. So 3 and 5 are on the same side of the transversal, and they're also interior between the parallel lines. 4 and 6 are same side of the transversal, and in between interior the parallel line. The same side interior angles. And those are supplementary. Now, these are not examples of the adjacent supplementary angles I was talking about earlier. You can't just look at them and tell that they're supplementary. We're actually going to go through and kind of prove how these are supplementary. So, same interior angles in picture 1 are, as I mentioned, 3 and 2, and they add up to 180, and 7 and 6, which would add up to 180 since they are supplementary. And in picture 2, as I mentioned, 3. It should be 3 and 5 and 4 and 6. That's a typo. So 3 plus 5, those two add up to 180, and 4 and 6 add up to 80. So let's see if we can go through and identify angle relationships. So see if you can name two pairs of alternate interior angles. Are they congruent or supplementary? All pairs of angles in these pictures are going to be either congruent or supplementary if you have two parallel lines cut by one transversal. If you pick any two angles, they will either be supplementary or congruent. So, two pairs of alternate interior angles. I have 3 and 6 and 4 and 5, and they're congruent. Name two pairs of adjacent supplementary angles. Are they congruent or supplementary? That's easy, that they're supplementary because it's in the name. So let's see if we find some. 5 and 6 and 4 and 2. And you have lots of examples here. You could have chosen 1 and 2, 2 and 4, 4 and 3, 3 and 1, 5 and 6, 6 and 8, 8 and 7, and 7 and 5. They're next to each other on a straight line, so they add up to 180. Name two pairs of vertical angles. Are they congruent or supplementary? Well, we know vertical angles are congruent, so that answers that question. And there's a lot you could choose from. I chose 3 and 2 and 8 and 5. So 3 and 2, 1 and 4, 8 and 5, and 6 and 7 are all examples of vertical angles that are congruent. Two pairs of corresponding angles, and are they congruent or supplementary? Well, we know that corresponding angles means they're in the same place on each parallel line, so it means they're the same angle, which means they're going to be congruent. So angles 1 and 5 are corresponding, 3 and 7 are corresponding, 2 and 6 are corresponding, and 4 and 8 are corresponding. The ones I chose were 3 and 2 and 8 and 5, and they're congruent. Name 2 pairs of corresponding angles. Whoops, I showed you the wrong ones. 3 and 7 and 1 and 5, and they're congruent. Name 2 pairs of same side interior angles. Are they congruent or supplementary? So same side interior, so that's inside, interior means inside, in between the 2 parallel lines and on the same side of the transversal. So our only options are 4 and 6 and 3 and 5, and they are supplementary. Now I'm going to show you how all this comes together in the next 2 examples. It will help you to see where same side interior and alternate interior came from. If you know the ideas of vertical angles, corresponding angles, and supplementary angles that are adjacent to each other, that will help you to understand where all the definitions come from with parallel lines. So in this example, we know that line L is parallel to line M. We know that the measure of angle 3 is 120 degrees, and we're trying to find the measures of all the angles. Well, I'm going to go through and use vertical angles to start with. So know that this is 120 right here. All right. The next thing I'm going to do is use supplementary angles. So since this is 120, angle 3 is 120, then 4 has to be 60, because 4 plus 3 has to equal 180. Now, angle 7 is also 60 because it's vertical to angle 4, or because it's supplementary to 3 and supplementary to 8. You can use any of those definitions. So now I've figured out all 4 angles and what they equal on this one parallel line J, or L rather. Now I need to figure out the 4 on line M. This is where corresponding angles comes in. So I know that since 4 is 60, 2 has to be 60 because they're both in the same position on each parallel line. And from there, I can figure out all of these angles just like I figured out all of these using vertical angles, supplementary, or I can just use corresponding and copy down all the angles from over here. 7 has to be the same as 5. 1 has to be the same as what? 3. 6 has to be the same as what? 8. So you can see I didn't actually have to use anything except those first 3 definitions we learned, and I could figure out the measure of all the angles knowing only one angle in this whole picture. Now if you look at this picture, it will show you that alternate interior angles are congruent and same side interior angles are supplementary. So it always works out that way. It will also show you that the 2 supplementary angles, one will be acute and one will be obtuse. It always works out that way as well, unless you have perpendicular lines, and then they'll all be 90-degree angles. Let's do another example. So this is your classic picture, and we know angle 2 is 20 degrees because that's given, and we're to find out the measure of all the other angles. Well, let's start a different way this time. I'm going to start with 4 being supplementary. So these 2 have to add up to 180, so this has to be 160. And then I know automatically that this one's also 160 because it's vertical, or because it's supplementary to 2, and I know that 3 is 20 because it is vertical to 2 and supplementary to 4 and supplementary to 1. So now I can use